Yeah.
There it goes. Okay.
Mhm. Yeah, so my question is, in meditation, sometimes what I experience is, besides certain visual effects, every now and then this sound effect comes up. It almost sounds like a giant engine or a giant helicopter, blades spinning.
Okay.
Have you experienced that, or your students?
Um, Basically, what that kind of thing um, is referred to by Goenka as sankaras. And what he means by that is, let us say that tensions get stored in strange ways, and the unbinding or the unwinding of those tensions can be manifest in very, very strange ways for people. And that these strange things that happen to people, uh, because it's kind of unique to that person and they've never had it before, it's kind of difficult for them to describe and talk about what happened. But it comes in many forms like that, and that um, many different possibilities that can trigger it off. An example of that would be looking through the eyes and seeing with the eyes while the eyelids are closed, and that a field of vision will be there. And that what we will see then is kind of the random firing of the neurons that are in the eye that still give a sight, even though there's nothing to be seen. Some people talk about it in the sense that they see stars or that they see bubbles or some sort of movement, maybe even things like Mendelblot or fractals or that kind of stuff. The same thing is true with hearing. That we begin to hear things that are not really there, but it has the appearance or it has the quality that is actually coming from the ears themselves into the brain rather than something that's manufactured directly in the brain. All right. There are also things that are manufactured directly inside the mind that have similar qualities to it. And that one of these, by the way, that if the meditator is in a Hindu ashram and they talk about certain things, then the teachers, they want to hear all about it. But if they go, that same student goes and has that same experience in a Buddhist monastery here in Thailand with a good teacher, more than likely what the teacher will say is, don't pay much attention to that stuff, let it go. All right, it arose and it passes away, and it probably won't ever come back. The worst case is that students have an experience, they like it, and they want to try to bring it up again. And by trying to bring it up again, they're naturally not doing exactly what they did when it came up the first time. So by trying to bring it up again, they've added something that may not, in fact, be capable of doing that. I remember, in fact, the first time when I was experimenting with meditation that I had a really good experience. And so the next time I tried to recreate that good experience, and I couldn't do it. And so then I sort of went back and started to do exactly what I was doing the first time, and then that experience came again. So this is how it kind of goes. Don't pay too much attention to or latch on to any particular kinds of experiences that you had. Just know that never mind, start again, come back, come back to the breath, and be here now. That those things are not, how to say, they're not benchmarks, they're not milestones, They're not an indication of any success or failure or anything. They are just the kinds of stuff that happens when people get into starting to pay attention to the mind.
Right.
Okay?
This one seems unusual in the fact that it's always the same, and it seems to kick in at a certain level of concentration. So you said it's not a benchmark, but to me, it almost feels like, oh, I got to like certain level if I start hearing it. And uh, today I was kind of even playing with it, trying to see what the sound consists of. It didn't really go
Mm-hmm.
anywhere. It was still very like mechanical, like zhoosh, zhoosh, zhoosh sound, almost like if there is a giant air conditioner or something like that. That's because it's so
Well,
consistent.
that in fact might be. You, in fact, might get yourself into a state where things are so quiet on the inside that you can begin to hear things with the ears that are actually there
Right.
and you're hearing something.
That's why I was asking you to confirm, like maybe other people hear the same sound, it just exists, and you normally don't hear it, like like they say the universal sound or whatever that is. Yeah.
There has been some talk about that in the sense of, I think Hoist did some stuff and some others. What I'm talking about now is what we call the music of the spheres, or the music of the harmony of not just the planets themselves, but of if the entire universe is in motion, in vibration, then it must have some sound somewhere. But really, the answer is that it's far too complex for us. That more than likely, if you're actually hearing something there, it's something that's being produced in New York and cannot be heard in Bangkok.
Yeah, I went on a meditation retreat in Arizona in the middle of nowhere,
Uh-huh.
and almost feel like the second I got there, I started hearing that sound, and I felt like asking everybody, it's like, do you guys hear the same thing? Because it's so strange. I either hear it in deep meditation or on these like retreat grounds. Very strange. But yeah, I'm not really attached to it. It almost like comes, as a on the side and
Hmm.
just.
It may be a particular kind of sensitivity to hearing that only gets, let us say, experienced when things are very, very quiet,
Mm,
and that it may be something inside of the ear
mm,
system that you have. Uh, there were several things that happened in my lifetime, but my mother points it back to an ear infection that I had at the age of 3. But what has happened is that there is a part of the hearing system called the cochlea that has a fluid in it and hairs, and these hairs are of different lengths, so that when the fluid that's being moved by the eardrum, this cochlea, the fluid will move inside of this chamber, and how the mind then detects certain sounds is because of the length of the hair that is inside of the cochlea. These hairs um, can get broken, destroyed, etc., like that, which will then cut out certain frequencies for people. So that for me, very, very high violin notes I can't even hear, not anymore. And that I also have most trouble understanding women more than men. It's easier for me to understand men than it is to understand women in general. But really, I'm at a loss with young children. I do not, and my whole life, I've never been able to understand young children because of the high squeaky voices that they have. Is just at that range to where enough information is lost so that I don't know the word that they're using. So these are the kinds of things that can happen there may be something in yours so that a certain kind of frequency is there in the ear that under most circumstances is covered over by all of the normal sounds that we have throughout the day. But if you get into a really, really quiet area and really pay attention, you can begin to hear things that are emanating out of your own ear.
That's what it feels like because it's so consistent. Maybe it's the movement of the fluid or something like, like gentle wave or whatever, rocking or.
Exactly. But I don't know. But the important thing is that just because you're noticing it doesn't make it new. That's hard for us. We think that when we first notice something, oh, it must be brand new. I've done things like that my whole life, thinking that I see a brand new product on the market and I say, oh, wow, they've come out with something new. And then my dad tells me, no, that was there before I was born.
I was
And
thinking about that today because, there are certain energy therapies, like, energy healing and type of stuff. And I've experienced some of it, and it feels very unusual and magical. But what I think is we just don't really know much about like the way the body is, the way the area around the body is, on deep enough to understand why it feels anything. But I think eventually we'll know why. But right now it just feels like magic.
well, yes, um, the problem with magic um, is that we will apply that sort of concept to anything that we don't understand, which gives rise to philosophers saying things like that any technology that is sufficiently advanced will appear to be magical to those that are not up to that level of the technology. So imagine like this, imagine a boombox or a big radio was left in the woods and a set of monkeys or even a primitive human comes upon that boombox. They don't know what it is, but it is so unusual. And they touch a button and all of a sudden some music comes on and now things are really weird. The next thing you know, this boombox is going to be a religion. Even though the batteries run down and it won't play music anymore, they remembered it played music. And maybe if we bow and scrape and offer it coconuts, it'll start playing music again. Okay, this is what happens with magic is that it's merely are things that we don't understand. That they may not have to be technological. That in fact the human body is enormously complex, and that one of the things that we know about bodies, let us say, not necessarily human bodies, but mammals, because we are mostly reptiles, but we are also mammals in that level of, and that what we see in mammals a lot is something that we also see in humans, but it's been modified. And what I'm getting at is what we call grooming. That monkeys will pick fleas and ticks off of each other. I see dogs do that too. That they'll go and go no 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 all over not only their bodies but the bodies of the other dogs. Okay, they're chewing on themselves and doing things like that a lot. But when we get to humans, we seem to think that all we have to do is take a bath and change clothes and maybe put on makeup, and that's about it. And we don't pay much attention to the body. But if you look at a dog, because you've got one, notice how much time that dog is actually paying attention to its body. And so that's also the case with Anapanasati. That if you want to say it in a humorous way, the Buddha's teaching of Anapanasati is teaching us how to be like a dog, to pay attention to the body. And as you do that, you're beginning to discover new things that you didn't know before. And this is actually a good intro into the qualities of restlessness, because restlessness always or generally will manifest itself in the body. And one way of thinking is that by the time that it does manifest in the body, it's almost too late. Almost too late. And here's what I mean by that. If something happens, and it could be a thought, it could be a sight, it could be something that comes up, it can come right out of the mind, or it can come through the senses, but something will happen that will start just a little bit of fear, just a little bit of the chemical that comes out of the mind. That stuff will start to be released in the blood system, and it was only after it's released into the blood system that we're capable of experiencing it in the body. Some people experience restlessness, and there are many, many words for this. And if we begin to start using them all as a list, we'll get a better understanding of what this thing is. All right? That in fact, a good word for it would be stress. Another one would be anxiety. Another word we can use is boredom. Now, the word stress is an interesting word because Achan Tanisaro actually translates all of the occasions of dukkha in the suttas. He will actually translate that as stress. Okay. Now, in engineering, we know that there's various kinds of stress, but it has always stress has to do with a force that's applied to an object. Okay, so there's kind of stress that's a shearing stress. Like for instance, the object is at the bottom and the force is trying to move it sideways. So there's a shearing force. There's also a pressure force. So some items, in fact, can handle a huge amount of pressure by sitting something on top of it. But if you try to slide it this way, it'll break apart. It doesn't have the power to maintain a shearing force, but it does have the power of handling a pressure kind of force. Now, I don't want to go too much into engineering because that's not what we're studying here. So let's get back to this idea that there are things that happen that we react to by getting ready for it. And then there is still nothing to do. Okay? It quite naturally happens because the human being was able to survive through false positives. I think I've told you this story before. Two primitives, each one of them carrying a spear, walking down the path in the deep woods or jungle, and they hear a noise behind them. One of them immediately takes off running. The other one turns to see what it was. Guess which one was lunch? Okay, so the curiosity killed the cat in this case. And the one who was naturally afraid survived. But what if that noise that they both heard was their cousin, their daughter? And one turns to see her, and oh, he's so happy. And the other guy, he doesn't even know what happened. He's gone. He ran away. Why? Because that case was a false positive. These false positives have kept the species of human beings alive. To see danger when there's no danger is much better than to see no danger when there is danger. However, now that we live in modern society, things are not dangerous. Not nearly as dangerous as they were back in the jungle. So this self-preservation instinct that has kept us alert and kept us afraid now is almost a burden, because we intellectually, the human being has been able to create a society that is not nearly as dangerous as it was a million years ago. And yet we still run around in fear. We still run around stressed. Okay? So here's the thing, what can we do now to be a real modern in the sense of living in modern times with the ability to be safe and secure when the environment itself is safe and secure? Because many people, as you know, you see people all the time, they're full of fear when there's nothing to fear. A good example of that is Republicans. Racist. Racists are afraid of other races. Putin. Look how many people are afraid of Putin. All right? No need for you to be afraid of Putin. Not now. Maybe when you were in Russia, that was a jungle. But here in the U.S., there's no fear from Putin. Okay? We have to kind of understand this, that this restlessness, this deep um, uh, instinctual feeling that comes up comes directly right out of the self-preservation instinct. Those instincts is what allowed humans to pick up tools and turn them into weapons. And so now we live a life that's weaponized because of protection. A lot of that protection actually for humans comes from what we call, it comes out of the territorial instinct, but we call it tribalism. Tribalism is my tribe is safe because I know that tribe, but that tribe over there must be dangerous. So tribalism or the others is that it comes out of the instincts. It's instinctual for people to be racist. It's instinctual for us to be filled with fear, or at least have just enough fear so that we're not comfortable. So there's this underlying tension or restlessness that manifests itself in a number of ways. One of the ways it manifests itself, and the easiest way to see it, is as the form of hindrance. And this can be seen while the students are actually sitting in meditation, because that's when we're working with hindrances. And so restlessness manifests itself as a hindrance in the mind on a moment by moment basis, but it also has a major body function or a major body component of putting too much adrenaline and too much cortisol in the bloodstream. And what they have found, without understanding why yet, that as people get older, that the cortisol levels begin to rise naturally in the blood. Now, the questions that need to be answered is, are, are they constantly adding new cortisol, or is the old cortisol just building up and building up and building up? But what we don't know about this chemical, which comes out of the adrenaline gland also, operates very much like adrenaline to keep us nervous, tense, excited, and that in fact the nervousness can even come to the shaking of the hands. That in a lot of old movies, especially cowboy movies, they look at the gunslinger's hands. If he's shaking his hands, that means he's scared. If he's got rock solid hands, then that means that he's ready for this gunfight and will probably win because he's watching what's going on and not filled with fear. Okay, so shaking, trembling, um, nervous speech, etc., like that. You can see when people are in this state in a heavy way. But now we're going to start understanding it. Oh, yes, but all of us have it in slight ways, and that it comes up and down. And when the more it arises, the more cortisol and adrenaline we have in the system, then the less easy it is to think straight. We can't think straight when the body is full of these chemicals. These chemicals, in fact, are set up for fight or flight, not thinking. And then also it goes along with the concept of freezing. So when people get startled, they can't think very well. Um, I've got several examples, but the latest one is, and this is quite interesting, because I've watched the procedure happen. About a month ago, when a group of people were here at the house at nighttime, a coconut fell, making a big crash really close to the house. Every human being in that group knew exactly what it was, but the dog didn't. Lucky went nuts, and we all started laughing because Lucky didn't know what that coconut was. But just recently, because she's still a puppy, just recently she was laying out in the yard and a coconut fell right next to her. And she jumped up and she looked and she sniffed and she got the idea of what was going on. Yesterday, another coconut fell and she didn't go nuts. She knew what it was finally. Okay. Another example of that is that the old man is sitting in let us say, a bungalow in the mountains where it snows. He's got his dog there. Snow is on the roof, and it's let us say that the snow is melting. The man knows what's going on, and all of a sudden, the whole side of the roof of the snow falls off and lands with a crash, and the dog goes nuts. Bark, 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 bark. And the old man, he knows what that is. Okay. So this is where we're coming to understand is knowledge of what's going on is the most effective tool to recognize that this stuff is there so that we can start to watch for it. And where we can locate it mostly will be in the body. Many people will have it right in the solar plexus, right in the middle of the chest, right in here. Others will have it at the top of the stomach. Others will have it deeper in the stomach, and some will have it, and when I say some people, I'll get to that. And let us say at other times, an individual will feel it very, very deep, down into the bowels, the lower stomach, way down there, like the bottom has dropped out. And we feel not empty in a Buddhist happy way, but empty in a really, oh no, it's like the bottom is falling out of my whole life kind of sensations. These are bodily sensations that manifest themselves through these bodily chemicals that are useless to us in our society today, but kept us alive 100,000 years ago. So that's one of the ways of looking at it, that this is natural stuff. It's been keeping us alive individually and as a society, but it's there too much, causing false positives. We want to be, when it's positive, to know it's positive. If there's some danger, like you're in the middle of the road and somebody honks the horn because here they come, it's a good idea to get out of the way, to see what's going on and move. That's a positive, not a false positive. But you can see that a lot of people are moving around New York with false positives. They're in a hurry when there's no reason to be in a hurry. They're unhappy when there's no reason to be unhappy, because they do this to themselves. Okay, so what are we going to do now about this kind of restlessness? Well, the first thing is to recognize it when it's merely a hindrance. Let me give you some examples of, and this will happen mostly to new students. As they begin to progress, this doesn't happen so much, but one of them we call refrigerator or refrigerator door, where the student is sitting in meditation and they have the idea, oh, maybe I left the refrigerator door open. What's really going on under that is that they think that there is something wrong or something needs to be done, and so they're going through a catalog of various possibilities, and the first one they come up with, maybe the refrigerator door is open. I should go check the refrigerator to make sure the door is closed, okay? However, that can get so bad, or let us say that the person can be so unmindful that they can actually kind of wake up standing in front of the refrigerator. Why am I here? I was in the meditation hall a minute ago, and all of a sudden I'm here at the refrigerator, right? It's that restlessness that drives people off of their meditation cushion. It's restlessness that comes up. And it's a deep restlessness that gives us an urge we've got to do something. Got to get up and check the refrigerator door, or I've had enough of this meditation. When you understand restlessness in the sense of boredom, and you recognize, what will a mom do if the kids are, let us say, on a journey in the back seat of the car? Mommy, I'm bored. What does mommy want to do? She wants to give the child something to do to occupy the mind so that the child doesn't feel bored, right? Okay. Well, that's also the case here. We're going to do something else other than wallow in our own self-pity of boredom. And that is, we see that boredom, just like we were in the very beginning, recognizing that the mind has wandered away from the breath, and then mindfulness kicks in, and we say, aha, I see you, mind. You've wandered away from the breath. Come back again and start again. This is actually the very same technique that we're going to start working with, this restlessness and boredom. Aha, I see you. Begin to recognize boredom as boredom, restlessness as restlessness. Now, when it's very small and a hindrance of the mind, that just means that the mind is restless and it flits from one thing to another, just goes around and around and around, kind of looking for, as it were, satisfaction. Rather than manufacturing the satisfaction, the mind is out kind of looking for it. It's feeling dissatisfied and it's looking for something to fix in order to find the satisfaction. So the first job that you have to do is, when the mind gets restless like this, is to recognize it, to see it, and to say, aha, I see you, restless mind. Come settle back down, come take a deep breath, start monitoring the body, and start coming back to the breath and start coming back to the here now. That restlessness will come up again. Never mind, I see it again. I see you again and again. And every time that we disrupt it by seeing it and coming out of it, we begin to weaken it. If we just allow the restless mind to be restless and just moving from object to object, then it's creating and deepening an old habit, making it more and more strong, which eventually makes people more and more scatterbrained. They can't focus on anything because the mind is just all over the place. And not only that, but so is the body. They're all worked up. But through mindfulness first of the hindrance of a wandering mind, and recognizing that, when you come back, you want to check to see, what has this wandering mind done to the body? What chemicals have been released? Where are the tensions now in the body that are associated with this wandering mind? And like I say, for many people, it's right here in the chest. You can feel it like a knot. And so we begin to watch for that knot to come up. And we recognize sometimes that knot comes up automatically, all by itself. It's like that it didn't have any thoughts, that the knot just came. And then because the knot is there, now a kind of thought system will start up. Now, we talked last time as an introduction to this about the various occurrences where this stuff will come up because of history. One is around food. Another one is around travel. I've really began to recognize that over time and that I can see it basically. The time when it's most likely to come up is when I've got to go meet someone like a student coming in on the boat, and I get into the truck by myself, and all of a sudden that old tension, that old anxiety comes up, and if I'm not careful, I will go too fast. I drive too fast. I started driving really, really fast when I was a teenager, and I learned how to do it well. All right. But times for that are over now. I'm an old man. There's no reason to have that tension and anxiety if I plan early enough. That's one of the things that we've been working really interesting. My wife is like that with my daughter, is to get her up really early so that she has plenty of time to get dressed and to have a bath and spend time with the family before she has to go to school. Because normally what happens is people say, "Oh, I need to sleep," and now when we get up and now we're in a panic. A really clear example of that is Mr. Bean. It's really interesting because almost always he'll have a theme of sleeping late and then getting up and wasting his time and then realizing that he's got an appointment and now he's just all over the place. Okay, that's what happens to us. So giving Kitty that opportunity to feel very comfortable and very relaxed and very much on time so that we don't have to hurry to go do anything, because that's part of that restlessness, is being in a hurry. In fact, in TA, they have identified this underlying tendency and called it a driver and gave it the name hurry up driver, that we feel driven to hurry up, to get it done. Okay, that hurry up driver manifested itself as high speed driving for me. Motorcycles are the favorite because then you can go like this between the traffic. Cars you don't like so much because you have to put on the brakes so that you won't run into the guy behind you. But motorbikes, no, you just go around them. It doesn't matter what traffic is there, you go around that too, and off you go. But it's driven by this anxiety that we feel like that we're in a hurry. We've got to get it done. Things are an emergency, all right? When in fact it's not. But in fact, that feeling of things being driven, things being in a hurry, actually builds up in layers as we're not watching. Okay? Here's another classic example for myself, is that I'm on my way to someplace, I've got an appointment, I've got plenty of time, and then I have the thought and remember that I've forgotten to bring something that's needed. I left my cell phone or I left blah, blah. Now I've got to go back home to get it. When I'm turning that car around, I'm already in high anxiety, with kind of the idea that I've got to get back to the house, pick up the cell phone or whatever, and get back into traffic in time to get to the original destination at the same time that I would have gotten there had I not had to go back home to get the phone. All right? And I'll be in a state of anxiety when I arrive. The anxiety is still there. All right. That's so you can start to experiment. When does that stuff come up for you? Most people it comes up with whenever we travel. In fact, it's so interesting that in the analogies of the hindrances in Sutta number 39, the Buddha actually talks about traveling, being out with all of your baggage and all of your goods, and then you come to have a final destination. You've either reached um, let us say, a hotel for the night, or better still, you've arrived home with all of your goods intact. And what a load off, right? You get home, finally you've gotten home. Even coming home for work, people have that. Finally getting home. It's almost like that we get into a state of anxiety because we want to get home, and so we hurry up to get home. And as soon as we get home, now what we have to do is not only set down all of the objects that we've got in our hands, we also need to set down that anxiety that got us to the house. And most people can do that. What a relief it is to be home now. You know that, right? Okay, so this is the way to start thinking about the hindrances. Is that when we're in the hindrances, we're in a state of anxiety, we're in a state of restlessness, and when we come back to the breath, we're coming back home again. And by taking that breath to start checking things out to see what's there, do a little inventory. Oh, there's the anxiety there. Let me breathe into that, break it up. You can feel it while you're sitting on the cushion. You can feel it while you're walking down the street. Anytime that you become mindful of it, anytime that you become aware of it, that's the time to start checking out what levels of anxiety do we have right now. Because this anxiety is based in fear, and the fear is based in self-preservation. And right now, you're not in danger. There is nothing to preserve. There's no self to preserve anyway. In fact, the guys got the whole thing wrong when they invented the terms. They should have used organism preservation instinct, because it's not a self to be protected, but there is the organism. That we do need protections. When will the protections be enough?
I feel like at this point, if I look really deep into it, probably less than 1% of the day I am not in anxiety. There is probably some kind of anxiety going on all the time. Deep down, you know.
Ooh, typical New Yorker.
No, but you don't even notice it. You just get the
That's
symptoms of it.
that's exactly correct. We don't notice it because we've gotten used to it. Okay. One of the analogies that I use for this is like imagine that you've got a splinter in your in a toe. All right. So we say, "Oh well, I'll get used to it." We start walking on our heel. We start walking differently because we're avoiding that toe, but now it's not hurting because I've learned to walk differently. But if I would take the time and do an investigation and find that splinter and pull it out, then the full foot will heal, and now I can go back to walking normally. So, in a way, you've been hobbling around for your whole lifetime trying to avoid that anxiety by not stepping on it exactly, to where if you can remove it, then you can start to dance your way through life, unconcerned with avoiding those postures that cause so much tension and anxiety. So this is one of the ways of looking at it, is it is far better to investigate that stuff, to find out where it is, and to pull it out so that we can heal. Now the analogy breaks down because in this case it's much more like blowflies or what do they call it? Mango flies. You probably not aware of that. It's a disease that mammals have um, in Africa, where they're larvae of a fly that will dig into the skin and pupate in under the skin, and that every one of them needs to be removed, one after another after another. So it's going to be like that with the anxiety too. It's not just one splinter; it's a whole collection of them. But the joy is that once you can see it one time, breathe into it, relax through it, and remove it, that gives you success. And oh, what sweet success that is to be able to actually relax and have that tension and anxiety and restlessness, boredom, etc., melt away. And by doing it one time, then you also have the skill already starting to bud that you can do it again. After you begin to get used to seeing that anxiety and then doing this procedure that we're talking about, noticing it throwing the thoughts that are associated with it out of the mind. Be joyful that you can see that stuff, and then do an inventory of the body so that you can find tensions in the body and then kind of breathe into them, relax them, break them up. When by doing this procedure over and over and over again, you become confident. The doubt itself, can you do this, is beginning to melt away also. So you're actually doing two things. You're actually more than that. You're developing the skill of mindfulness. Now mindfulness is pointing to deep stuff. In the beginning, we only started with watching the breath. Now we're watching deeply into the body. The next one is we're developing skill. We're developing the skills not only of sati, but of seeing deeply things that we couldn't see before. But the main thing is the confidence of saying, aha, I caught you, out you go. You're not going to run my life. I am not going to be a victim to this anxiety anymore. That's the major thing, is that change of attitude from being a victim of the anxiety to be champion over it. And you know that you can be a champion over it because you've just given yourself the experience of being a champion over it. So that's the way that we work with this stuff. And by the way, we've also talked about another one, and that is food. That people will generally go into a state of anxiety. I see you shaking your head. Is that shaking your
That's
head?
my huge struggle for forever. Mindful eating. I just can't get myself to do it 100%. Not yet.
Okay, we'll do it 10% and be happy that you've gotten up to 10%. Maybe
Yeah,
it'll get to 11 soon, and
it's
then
the mind,
12. Don't
you
worry
know.
about, that's the American way, all or nothing kind of, rather than recognizing and be satisfied with your progress. Mindful eating is a skill to be developed. And that in some cases, some teachers will say to chew and give you a number, like chew the food 30 times or whatever, like that.
Please
That's not actually.
give me something like that, because I inhale the food while watching, videos on YouTube, and it's just a mess.
Yes, that actually, within the context of the Buddha, and if you can see this done at monasteries, the quality is when eating, just eating. All right. Now, Western society has developed many, many, many habits around when we're eating. We don't stop doing anything. We just add eating to whatever we were doing before. But within the Buddhist context, that in fact at Wat Suan Moken and in many other uh, temples and organizations where they're doing retreats, before the food, they do a mindfulness of food reflection. So it's like this: even if it's 100 people to be fed in two lines, they stand in line, they get their bowl, they fill the food, and then they'll go and sit down at the table, but no one eats. Everyone has the job of just look at the bowl, just notice the bowl. After everyone has taken their food, now it's time to do the food reflection. And the food reflection comes right out of Sutta number 2. That starts out like this. And by the way, in the Sutta number 2, the Sabba Sutta, this is in the section they call development by using. Or a better way of saying it is abandoned by using it. So we're going to abandon food by using it. And we do this with all 4 requisites. We abandon clothing by having only the correct or small amount of clothing. We abandon food by eating correctly. We abandon lodging and housing by having only adequate housing. And we abandon our, I'll use the word, uh, um, hypochondriacness by doing with medicine only what needs to be done. And you know, my mother was a hypochondriac. I think she still is. She's a 95 years old, and she's been to the doctor at least 1,000,000 times in 95 years. So, just adequate food, adequate protection. So, in this case of adequate food, by what we're going to then do is abandon our attachment to it because our attachment always has to do with this anxiety. As I think I mentioned to you before, way, way back in history, that food gathering was the most dangerous time in any animal's life. That when the lion is on the hunt, that's the most dangerous time for the lion. For the gazelle, even more dangerous. And so you can see that with dogs, even modern dogs. You've got one. I don't see him on your couch right now, but oh, there he is. He's behind you. Right, he's doing just what dogs need to do. He's being a dog right now. He's taking it easy. That's why dogs have some Buddha natures, because they know how to take it easy. But if you took a big piece of ham, or perhaps a ham with a bone, and put it into his bowl, he more than likely will take that big ham bone out of his bowl and go someplace else. Have you noticed him do that? Taking food. That's because the dog at that point is feeling anxiety. He cannot eat all of this food at this particular place, so he's got to go take it somewhere. All right. So this shows then that because of our animal nature, because of our background, that food time is a time for anxiety. It's a dangerous time. So what we have to do while we're eating is to go back to this food reflection and reflect. The food reflection is something like this. With wise reflection, I eat this food. It's not for beautification. It's not for fattening or gratification, even, that we eat food for the nourishment of the body, and that we eat food so as to eliminate bad feelings, but we don't eat so much that we accumulate new bad feelings. In other words, overeating or being stuffed. But in the other case, it's this anxiety that we have around eating food. So now that you've admitted that you have this, we can start doing this kind of food reflection so that when you sit down, here's the way that you do it. You gather your food together so that it's in front of you. Then you turn off everything. Turn off the TV, you turn off the mind, you turn off the husband, you turn off everything, and pay solely 100% attention to the eating. You think that's going to be hard to do, huh?
No, it's good because now I have accountability to you. So
Yes, that's one of the values of having a good teacher who gives us these things to do, or that we can go do a retreat where we can see that this is the way to. If you read this out of a book, you'd say, "Oh yeah, it's a good idea," and that would have been the end of it. But by seeing that all this is actually a method or a way to remove tensions and anxieties in our lives that come all the time or often. You said like 95% of the time you're in this state. Well, it's going to be there when you're eating food. So this is a time to deal with anxiety while you're eating the food. Okay? And so we have a procedure then. Normally, except for my friends in Sri Lanka, we eat with spoons and forks. Even in Thailand, even in China, they have chopsticks. All right. In medieval times, they ate with a dagger. So, what we're talking about here is that as we're eating, we're going to pay a lot of attention to the hands and what the hands are doing. Because normally when people are eating, they're using their hands and their utensils to play with their food. Sometimes cutting it up, sometimes stirring it around, sometimes separating it, all kinds of things we do with food. We learn to do this as a child. But the new experiment now is that while I have food in the mouth, I'm going to set the utensils down, fold my hands, and chew, and only chew. And while I'm chewing, I put all of the mind into the inside of the mouth so that I know where the food is. I know the texture of the food. I can feel as I'm pressing down on it that I can pull the juice out of the morsels that are still left, and that we can begin to swallow that. Okay, make sure that the food is chewed completely, and only allow the amount of food that's completely chewed to be swallowed, even down to 1 grain of rice left. Chew it too, break it up so that, and by the way, this is good for digestion. Very good for digestion. If you chew the food very, very well, then it's easily digested. So this is the way that we do it, that we take a spoonful, and that also uh, in the patty milk, there's an entire section, by the way, I think it's like 30 different rules or so of how for the monks to eat. And the first response that people have is, oh, goodness, there's just too many rules. That's crazy to have too many rules. A deeper inspection, and we recognize, oh, wait a minute, these are not rules from the Buddha. These are table manners. This is the way that they had, that this was the manners. This was the table manners that they had in the time of the Buddha. And that you can see those same table manners in many of the things that we have now. I mean, we even nowadays tell our children, don't talk while you're chewing food or while you're eating food. Well, we only take that in Buddhism just a little bit further. Instead of empty your mouth and then talk and then take another bite, is no, empty your mouth and your mind, eat all of the food, and now we can talk. All right, so that's the basic difference, is to not eat, not to talk while we're eating. Does not mean just while I've got food in my mouth, but while I'm at lunch or while I've got food in front of me, we're not going to talk. We're going to eat instead. So that's these table manners. Now another one of those table manners is not take a morsel that's too big. That we start eating smaller, not just smaller portions of food in general, but every bite is just a little bit smaller. An example of that would be like drinking water, that we can gulp water or we can sip water. We learn to start sipping. That for myself, what I would do is I could sip coffee so long as it was hot, but as soon as it gets cold, then I'll start to gulp it down. So I've had to train myself that even when the coffee has gotten cold, just a little sip. Let that cold coffee last another 30 minutes rather than 2 gulps. So this is the way we start taking small bites. We start paying attention to that food in the mouth. We start noticing the textures. But in fact, when we're doing it correctly, doing it this way, the food actually tastes a whole lot better. It actually is quite wonderful. For instance, if I take the sip of that coffee, just a little sip, I can really, really experience the sweetness of it if it's got sugar, or the coffee taste itself. But if I'm gulping it down, I don't even get any of that taste. If I sip, I can take 10 sips and get 10 deep experiences of the taste of the coffee. If I gulp it down, I won't get any of them. And so that's the quality of slowing down, not in the sense of how fast we chew, but in how we swallow. That's the important thing, is to swallow slowly and carefully. Make sure that you've made contact with the food. Make sure, in fact, in this respect, that you've actually got things well salivarized. In other words, you've really metastasized and made it you now. By doing this, we can deal directly with that anxiety because we're saying, slow down, be here now, be in the mouth with the food, experience the textures, run the tongue around. And then, after we've swallowed everything, we can take a deep breath. And now, slowly, we pick up the utensils again and get one morsel, and then we put it in and we start to experience. Now, there's many things that can help you do this. One of the things that you can see is that if you're eating your food in the presence of other people eating the food, do you finish before they do? Do you finish after they do? Or are you only about halfway through when everybody else is finished? That's the way of looking at it. So that you've gotten things slowed down now that you're running about a quarter of the speed that you used to run. So that meal time now actually does take 30 minutes of eating. So that we're eating slow and carefully. And also between the every mouthful, well, actually every morsel that we eat that's not big enough to be a full mouthful, but just a small tidbit. After we've eaten that, then we go back down upon a sati again. Take a deep breath. Oh, that was good. And then we pick up the utensils. We take another morsel and we put it in. We put the utensils down and we sit there and we happily chew and experience that morsel, experience the various tastes. Find, for instance, a kernel of corn. Identify that kernel of corn and chomp on it. Take that little piece of meat if you're eating meat, tear it to shreds. Shred the thing completely. Okay, this is the way that we do it. If we do that, the anxiety around food will greatly diminish. Now, there will be meals, there will be times when you can't do this. But every opportunity that you have that you can do this, practice this method of eating so that you metastasize the food, you eat small morsels, you're not fidgeting with your hands, you're not watching YouTube.
Not watching you on YouTube.
Not even watching me on YouTube. When
That's
you're
what.
eating, just eat. So this is the food reflection, and by doing this, you wind up not eating quite so much. One of the things, by the way, I don't know if you do it or not, but I share my food with the dogs. That helps me to not be greedy because I have to say, oh, he's got to have some too. I even sometimes take food right out of my mouth and give it to the dogs because they're wanting it. They want it more than I do. And so, me being their caretaker and their alpha male, then I take care of them like that. So I always leave food in the bowl for the dogs also. They always have something as a snack, and so this also helps because it helps us to come out of the greed for the food. And I know a lot of people get really uptight and angry. I don't want the food in or the dog in the room while everybody's eating. You know, the dog just becomes a beggar. Well, he's begging because you're not feeding him. if if you feed the dogs, they'll sit there very quietly, very politely, and wait because they know that another morsel will eventually be coming. And we can start to think about it in the sense of sharing the food because that's also an antidote for this anxiety around, oh, I've got to have my food. like that. You can see people, in fact, in dining halls and places like that, with their shoulders up. They go around in tension. So when they're carrying the plate, they're carrying it around like this when they're going to go find a seat to sit in. It's amazing how uptight and tense people get around food. And then you have the dinner table where the family, all uptight and upset about food, come together. And that's where you have your family arguments. In fact, it's so famous that there's a joke about the Thanksgiving dinner, because the old people who are watching Fox News and the rest of the family who's watching CNN, and some of them watch NBC, and they come to the dinner table at Thanksgiving and they kill each other.
Yeah, we can't talk politics at Thanksgiving.
Well, we shouldn't be talking politics whenever we're eating. But that's the whole idea about the food. So the two major times is when we're traveling and when we're eating food are the times when that tension is most likely to occur. Well, guess what? These are two things you do every day. So we have to deal with tensions and anxieties and restlessness every day. If we deal with them wisely, you'll have a good life. If we don't deal with them wisely, then we will live a life full of fear, anxiety, suffering, and we don't even know the connections. We don't even understand that, oh, this is an instinctual issue with humans. It comes out of our deep past, and that it's an automatic um, defense mechanism that's brought up. Our job now is to not let that happen, but to be alert to it, to notice it. That in fact, when you are eating, at whatever point, whether with getting the food ready to put into the mouth or while you're eating it, but if you do come to the point of experiencing anxiety while you're eating, take that as a miracle, because that's what you're looking for. Can you actually spot the anxiety arise while you're eating? If you do, then if you're munching, stop munching. If your hands are stirring food, set the utensils down and pay very close attention to that anxiety. Notice it. Start breathing with it. And then go back to the chewing of the food. Okay? Spend time with that anxiety, but spend time with it like a champion, like a hunter looking for its prey. Okay? To root that stuff out, to see it, to notice it, so that you won't be a victim to it. If it's occurring, if it's rising and we're not aware of it, then we're going to be subject to it. But if we're there, alert, awake, and responsive, then it will be subject to the mind. It's almost like that we've got two minds. And in fact, we do. We've got a human mind and a reptilian mind. Which one's going to work here? Because all of that anxiety and tension and everything is coming out of the reptilian mind, to where the reality of the situation, the human part of the mind knows, hey, I'm sitting here in a restaurant, or hey, I'm sitting here in my home and I'm having dinner. Why is this anxiety coming? There's nothing to cause it. The reason is because it comes out of our deep past. It comes out of our nature. And so it needs to be dealt with at that level. When that fear comes up, when that anxiety comes up, say while we're eating, then the right thing to do is to say, down boy, no problem. Everything is cool. No need for anxiety. This is the way you start to deal with it. And as you begin to deal with it that way, you become expert at it. So that whenever anxiety comes up, I see you. That will give you the ability to live a stress-free life. Because when the stress comes up, you can see it. And you can take charge of it. Aha, I see you. So, in fact, you can think of it like this: it's still always the same technique right from the very beginning. When we have sati to recognize, or when we remember that the mind is wandering away from the breath, to start again, start joyfully. So we use these four path factors for every breath of meditation. That is right noble view, right sati, right effort, to take the effort that it takes. Because this food exercise, for a while, is going to be some effort for you because it's going to have to break up a bunch of old bad habits. But ultimately, it's a new attitude, the new attitude about life, about how to live, free from tensions, free from worries, free from anxieties, relaxed, enjoying your food moment by moment, morsel by morsel.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
Okay? This is what anxiety is. Now, there's other ways of getting anxiety. Uh, One of them would be that you've got an appointment or a deadline. Another one would be that you've got an appointment or a deadline, but you can't do the things you need to do until something else happens. For me, the example is that we have to do a visa once a year, but in order to do the visa, I've got to have bank statements, I've got to have a report from the hospital, and I've got to have a report from the landlord. The landlord's no problem, but the bank statement has to be 7 days or less old. The hospital has to have a form for good health less than 7 days old. That's just the law, which means that a week or let us say a month before the visa, there's no reason to think about it because I can't do what needs to be done. So here I am. I've got to go get that hospital form. Oh, I've got to go to the bank. But I can't go to the bank because if I went now, I'd have to go later anyway because the form I got today is no good. It's expired. All right. So this is what happens, and you do that a lot in not you personally, but students do that a lot in their work because work always has deadlines. It's got meetings to go to and all of that kind of stuff. So this also will be a source of anxiety. Thinking about a meeting you've got to go to, or thinking about getting your taxes done. In fact, during the times when I was doing that, when I was a very, very young man, I did my own taxes naturally, and there was an enormous amount of anxiety. But later, I learned to have an accountant do that because the $200 or $300 that I had to pay the accountant was much cheaper than all the anxiety that I had to deal with by doing the taxes by myself. Knowing that I still had to gather up all of the information, and that was the real work. But the anxiety comes when you're filling out that form. And part of the anxiety comes with, can I cheat on this line? Can I cheat on this line? And see, and that gives us some enormous anxiety. So these are times also to look for this anxiety that comes up. Are things around forms to be filled out, jobs to be done, etc., like that, because these will be times when anxiety will come up because we feel pressured. But if you are going to be a good little Dhamma dude who is scrupulously honest, then filling out tax forms is not nearly so much anxiety because you're going to do it accurately. You know you're going to do it accurately, and because of that, there's no need for anxiety. But the anxiety will come anyway. So these are places to look for it. One is traveling. Another one is eating food. Another one is whenever you think or are involved with assignments that are off into the future, because these will be sources of anxiety. Why? Because in this case, that's work to be done. When you're traveling, that's work to be done. Things have to be done. You have to be in performance mode. The question is, can you be relaxed and in performance mode? Can you do performance mode without anxiety, without being driven, without being in a hurry? Even now, I experience that hurry up driver. An example, okay, YouTube. If you got to go to the bathroom, then you can just pause YouTube and then go to the bathroom. But what people will do is they'll say, oh no, I'm going to go quickly to the bathroom and come right back and I won't miss anything. And so they run to the bathroom and they do it in the bathroom very hurry and they come back in the bathroom. And then most likely what they're going to do is stop the video and go back to where they were in the first place. So they could have spent all the time they wanted in being in great joy while they were in the bathroom and still come back. You know, why do we do this to ourselves? So these are all various things that we do to put ourselves into a hurry, but we also have to understand that we are in the habit of putting ourselves into a hurry unnecessarily. And that this tension, this anxiety, this restlessness comes right out of our genes. It's built right in. So it's quite natural for people to get uptight, anxious, because that whole system kept us survival, kept us alive at one time. Now it actually interferes with our survival. It actually, with extra cortisol and too much adrenaline, etc., in the bloodstream, it actually lowers lifespan. One of the things that's quite remarkable, but the type people, it's just part of the course. It's just ordinary knowledge. It's no big deal at all, but for Westerners, it seems quite amazing that many of the monks live into ripe old age. My Upajjhaya, the last time I saw him, he was 107. Not breaking any records, but right up there. The last time I saw Panyananda, Ajahn Panyananda, he was 97. Monks get old. Why is it that they get old? Well, they get old in a way that if they're good monks and practicing properly, then they are free from tensions and anxiety, so they can live into a ripe old age without burning themselves out the way that most people do. We burn out. We wear the body out, and that the friction that wears the body out are these chemicals that are being released unnecessarily. They were survival issues at one time. But the very thing that kept us alive when we were primitive man is now the main killer for humans in our modern society. That, by the way, is also true about the lungs themselves. In other words, without breathing, you won't live. You'll die. You have to keep breathing. But the very quality of breathing itself actually destroys the follicles, the vesilia, in the lungs, so that the air that we breathe will actually start to kill us. So that very anxiety that kept us alive as primitive is now shortens the lives of people in modern society. So the question is, can you see that stuff in operation so that you can bring it to a close, bring yourself out of stress, out of anxiety, so that you can live a happy, peaceful, relaxed life full of joy? And live a long time, too. So this is anxiety. This is restlessness. The Buddha knew all about it. So you can practice these things.
Oh,
the
yes.
main one is the food. and anything associated with food. But you can also see travel, moving around, having tasks that need to be done. These are all things that people will use to create anxiety for themselves. So whenever you've got work to do, whenever you've got to travel, whenever you're eating, these are times for you to be on guard for does that anxiety come up? If it does, where is it? Have you noticed it in your body? Can you see the anxiety? Can you? Can you feel it yet?
Oh, yes. If I pay attention, I do.
That's what we're looking for. Start paying attention. Where does it manifest itself?
I would say it's like a tension in the shoulders almost. Yeah.
Yes, yes. The association with the shoulders has a lot to do with the neck, which is one of the primary chakras. Why is the neck so important? The answer is, how does a lion kill a gazelle? They go after the
Yeah.
neck. Where's the vampire? Does the vampire suck big toes? Oh no. It goes right after the jugular. So this is a place where we get tense. That in fact, there's two stories about where does the name redneck come from. Does the word redneck come because the sun is shining on the plow farmer out in the field and he gets his neck red? Or does the redness come from his anger? Interesting question, huh? Where does that redneck come from? It comes. So you're saying you can experience it in your shoulders. Good. That's a good indication because that means that one of the qualities you can use to relax is by actually intentionally relaxing the shoulders, actually pulling it down, to pull the shoulders way down. That's actually a karate practice, is to lower the shoulders to get them down rather than having them up in protection of the throat area. Good point. Excellent. I'm glad that you told me that you're noticing your shoulders rising. That's a really, really strong indication of tension, anxiety. That's why people have so much neck tension.
Another is shortness of breath. For example, my work is not really stressful now, but I notice when I get to work, I'm not breathing relaxed. I'm breathing kind of funny, as if, there is stress. And I'm wondering, there's really no stress right now. Why am I in that mode of, oh, job is stressful, job is stressful. So I noticed that.
Well, the Americans talk about it like that in the sense that some jobs are stressful and other jobs are not. It's got nothing to do with the job, it has everything to do with mindset. But because many humans will have a particular mindset for a particular kind of job, the people kind of think it's the job itself that creates the stress rather than, oh no, it's the humans. They're the ones who are creating themselves. A clear example of that is police, because they talk about it all the time. Police, oh, they've got to be armed. Oh, they've got to be on guard. Oh, it's a dangerous world out there. Oh, it's very dangerous, and they've got to be high paid because it's a very tense job, right? You've heard that. But then you go and you find there's a different way to police. An example of that would be Mayberry RFD with, what was his name? Um, Andy Griffith. Have you ever seen that? It's a TV show from the years ago. Mayberry RFD is what it's about. It's about a small town in North Carolina to where the sheriff goes around completely unarmed and treats the entire community as if he were just the elder brother. And it's a comedy show, but in this comedy show, he winds up arresting people and doing all kinds of things. And his sidekick, the deputy, is so inept that, by the way, is Andy Taylor is the part name. Andy Griffith was the actual actor, and Barney Fife was the sidekick. And he was so inept that Sheriff Taylor would only let him have one bullet. You can carry around one bullet. He really wanted him to go around disarmed. Okay, this is a different way of doing it. They're capable of doing that in England. The Bobbies are actually, let us say, street friends that you meet. To where in the United States, the cops, when you meet a cop, you're in trouble in America. Why is that? It's because the mental attitude of the people who are on the force, and it's got nothing to do with the job of being a policeman. When the job of being a policeman is done correctly, it can be a very happy job. Much more like a teacher. And yet now in the United States, they actually want to arm the teachers, give them guns, turn them into policemen, but not into policemen like a teacher, but policemen the way that the police are trained, to be uptight, tense, in a dangerous situation all the time, full of anxiety. They say it comes with the territory, but oh no, each individual officer brings his own anxiety along with him for the job. The job does not create the anxiety. That's a hard one. So you say that your job is not stressful. What that means is that you don't stress yourself at that job. Other people will. Depends upon the mental attitude and the stress level of the person and the mindfulness of the person. This is what it is. And it's got nothing to do with the job that we're doing. And also, it has to do with skill level. That if we are very, very skilled at a job, then it's unlikely to have as much anxiety as if we're new at it. If we're a rookie on the police force, that's where the anxiety really gets started, is because not only is the cop in an artificially mental, dangerous world, he also feels incompetent at dealing with that dangerous world. So this is all part of the issue about where these anxieties come in is based upon the individual and your own background. But that, as far as I know, every human being is, let us say, too uptight, too anxious, because we don't know how to deal with this stuff that comes right naturally, right out of the self-preservation instinct. Just like conceit or mana, we'll talk about later. We've talked about it some. But
Yes,
those two
please.
things spring right out of the self-preservation instinct. That we got to do something. There's that fear there, and we've got to be on guard. But that on guardness that we have is a false on guardness, because we're not even on guard to the right thing. What we need to be on guard for is the anxiety and the tension, as opposed to being on guard for New York is a dangerous place. Because New York itself is not dangerous, just the mental states of the people in New York. That's what's dangerous. And everyone as an individual is more dangerous to themselves than they are to the other people around them anyway. That's the thing that's quite amazing, is that we are all our own worst enemies because of this anxiety and this tension that we're not capable of managing. So, I think we've got this topic pretty well covered, with quite a lot of assignments that are built into it.
Oh, yes. I got my work cut out for me. I have a curiosity question
Yes.
about arahants. You know how you mentioned that, in general, arahants would just want to go away from society and be somewhere quiet and by themselves. Do you think there are a lot of arahats out there these days, and have you met a lot, or?
About 30 years ago, I was told by an old monk that I trust. I think he's dead now, but I trusted him then and I trust him now. I trust him, in fact, so much that even rapture or the goosebumps are coming up my back right now as I'm thinking about this story. One of the things he said was that there's probably about 25,000 arahants in
Wow.
Thailand.
Wow.
That
Oh,
was his
goodness.
estimate, about 25,000 arahants in Thailand, which means not one arahat per temple, because there's more temples than there are arahats in Thailand, which makes them kind of rare. But the Westerners, when they hear 25,000, say, wow, that means if it's doable for them, it's doable for me. And that's exactly the kind of attitude that you need to have. It's doable, to where many people think that arahats are extraordinarily rare. Like maybe one or two a generation is best we can do. And some even think that there haven't been arahats for hundreds of years. And that's not the case. Part of the reason is that they don't know how to judge an arahat. In fact, I've got a story about that. Brenda, a very, very good friend of mine who's been living at Wat Suan Mok for, gosh, I don't know how long, since the 90s. I met her probably in 2002, so we've been around each other for 20 years. And I've known Achan Dhamma. He's a British monk who has been a monk since 1993. So he's getting up there close to almost 30 years now. But Brenda said that she overheard, because she knows some Thai language, she's no Thai. She says she overheard Pramarut tell a Thai layman when they were traveling on the boat coming over to what Caltum. And Brenda says that she thinks that she overheard Achan Marut say to this layman that Achan Po was enlightened, that he was an arahat. And so she wrote that to me in an email almost as a surprise. And I haven't gotten around to answer her yet, but what's really going on is that there are two ways to tell an arahat. One of the ways is by noticing correctly with all of the various things that we know to look for. And the other one is to have this magical view that Westerners have about arahats being whoop-de-doo very special. Okay? So let's examine that for a little bit. If someone that you meet is actually over a long period of time that you observe this person and you notice that they never get into a hurry, that they're always relaxed and comfortable, and that they show no signs of anxiety, then we can put that as a check mark. He's got one of the qualities of an arahat. Another one would be if you see this same guy and you're around him a long time and you see the way that he deals with people and you see that he never gets into a competition. He never gets into I'm better than you are or comparing himself with other people, that he treats everyone the same. Then that's another one. Conceit. You cannot see over a long time observation of someone has no conceit, then you can check that off. Another quality of arahat. All right. You can also, over a long period of time, see that some people have absolutely no fear of death. That there is nothing to fear. In fact, with Achan Po growing old at 86 now, I think he's getting to pretty close to the point of looking at it, death as a friend rather than an enemy. All right. So you start checking these things off and you recognize, oh, when people have the qualities of an arahat that can be seen and demonstrated, then who am I to deny that label? Say, oh, he couldn't possibly be an arahat because they're so rare. Rather than recognizing, no, these qualities are things that can be picked up and developed, and that there are monks who intend to, not just monks, but lay people, intend to be free from anxiety, to be free from conceit, and thereby are live their lives in freedom, in joy, and this can be done. So in that regard, I'm thinking maybe 25,000 is a low estimate because I met a lot of people like this. Monks are in general, they're not uptight, they're not anxious. You can see by watching them eat their food that they're slow. They slow down. They don't eat quickly. They're not in a hurry. So these are the qualities that you can see, and these you know that you can develop these things for yourself. Now, one of the things then about this sort of being is that they would prefer also for themselves to be in the vicinity of people who also were not competitive and who are not uptight with anxiety. And so for that reason, if you have a temple that has only one arahant and everybody else is running around the temple freaked out, busy, doing things, arguing with each other, and all of that kind of stuff, the arahant really doesn't want to be around that. He'd rather be off on his own, under sky, under nature, having a ball, free from tensions and anxiety. So that's part of the reason. And also, even the Buddha said that he told Ananda. It's actually in a sutta. Uh, not monks, not his favorite people, but when dignitaries, royalty, Brahmins, outsiders who he doesn't know, when they come to ask questions of him, he told Ananda that he only gives answers with the intention of dismissing them, not inviting them in. Why? Because Buddha doesn't want to deal with royalty. He doesn't want to deal with Brahmins who want to compete over doctrinal issues or things like that. So this is why arahants tend to stay kind of off on the side or on their own or even deep into seclusion, because they know that if they spend too much time with people who are full of anxiety, that can spark anxiety and tensions in them also. And so they want to stay away from that. But don't worry, for a while you've still got anxiety, you won't be secluding yourself. But the more you see the nature of suffering, the more that you want to avoid it in all of its forms. Whenever you see suffering, you want to be away from it. And so we want to be away from people who are suffering. I mean, you can see that in all cases. Someone comes into a restaurant yelling. People are shocked, but then they want to hide. They want to withdraw. They don't want to be around that really heavy negative energy. So all things being relative, ordinary people to an arahant is full of tensions, anxieties, dangers, etc., like that. So the arahants also will kind of withdraw. They don't want to kind of be around uptight, upset people. But it might be different if that uptight, upset person comes to the arahant really seeking help, seeking Dhamma, then naturally the arahant's going to help that. But being around people who are just uptight, tense, and that happens. This is the reason why arahants want to be off into seclusion, and so they don't have to deal with the tensions and anxieties and competitions and conceit that other people carry. But can this be doable? Of course it can be doable, because doable for you, you're already able to do the anapanasati portion of when the mind wanders away from the breath, come back to the breath. Now that you know that you can do that, you can do this with anxiety too. You can do it with feelings. Because in fact, this anxiety that we're talking about, this restlessness, is deeply tied to the feelings, almost to the point that it's this anxiety or this tension that gives rise to feelings anyway, the feelings of wanting things so that if I get that thing, then I can be free from this anxiety. If I get this work done, then I can be free from the anxiety. It also can make me angry, can make me confused. So this is why um, restlessness is listed as an arupa uh, asava or fetter, because it's so difficult to see it directly unless you know what you're looking for. But feelings are a little bit easier to see, but still they're very subtle. So that's why we start in the beginning with the hindrances. We start with the breath because that's at least easy enough for the students to get started on. But once we go from breath to body to feelings down to the deep stuff associated with the instincts like life and death, anxiety, conceit, those kind of things that are very difficult to look at and to see and to get a hold of, guess what? Now we've got the skills to do that. We develop those skills with breath. We develop those skills with body. We've developed those skills with mind. We've developed those skills with feelings. So now with that, and in fact, you're still dealing with feelings, but you can put this together with the anxiety to begin to see how feelings and anxiety are working together. That you don't have to get all of your feelings cleared out before you deal with anxiety. In fact, by that time, it's it's it kind of morphs or changes to make it even more difficult to deal with, and that's even more true with conceit. In other words, when someone gets very much along the path to where their behavior is perfect, sila is perfect, their morality is great, their meditation practice excellent. What that does is that tends to form a huge amount of conceit in the sense of I'm a better Dhamma dude than everybody else. We need to start dealing with that conceit and that restlessness kind of early, because by the time it hardens into I'm the best Dhamma dude, then it's a really difficult nut to crack. That leaves someone along the path, but they can't go into arahant because now they've made it a very hard conceit that they hold, and it's difficult for them to see. Normally, it takes a friend, and sometimes it takes that friend's boot up their butt to figure out that, hey, I'm being really conceited here, and I've got to put that down. I've got to check that out, look at it, recognize it for what it is. And sometimes it can even get to the point that even at the level of the old master, he now doesn't know how to live. As the old master, he was conceited and he worked everything like that. Now that he's trying to figure out how do I live as an old master and do it in a non-conceited way, he doesn't know how to do that. That's not part of his experience. So every time he's got to come back, conceit or no conceit. Which one is it? Until he eventually gets his footing again. So this is why dealing with conceit and dealing with restlessness, let us say midway through the process, is better than waiting till the very end to do it. And this is a more natural method rather than a more organized method. The organized method would say do the fetters in order, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, and then you can deal with the higher fetters. But I think that the Buddha was more explicit in the sense of, oh no, while you're dealing with especially feelings, because here's something I think that you already know, but I'll go over it again. Fetters number 1, 2, and 3 are all about knowledge. Knowledge of the self, knowledge about rites, rules, and rituals, Silabhata Paramasa, and how we're attached to the rules. And the third one is the issue of doubt. Why? Because our knowledge is sufficient and is strong enough now that we completely finished with doubt. Doubt about what is the path and what is not the path. When we're completely finished with doubt, that means that we know that the Buddhist path is the correct one. That my job to do now is to be on guard for dukkha, dukkha nirodha. That is without a doubt the path. As opposed to other people, they haven't come to that. They've come to other conclusions such as Jesus saves. All right. So this is the state then of Sotapan is based on knowledge. Fetters number 4 and 5 are in fact feelings. Sensual lust, sensual greed, materialism, wanting things. And then the sixth fetter, no, the 4 and 5. The fifth fetter is ill will, not liking things, that kind of feeling. So within the Buddha's context, it looks like that we need to do number 1, number 2, and number 3 to gain the skills needed in order to start working with fetter number 4 and 5, greed and ill will. If you look at it like this, that means that this is actually nothing but the second noble truth. What is the cause of suffering? Greed, ill will, and ignorance or delusion. The first 3 fetters take care of that, ignorance, so that we come out of delusion, and now we've got the skills to deal with greed and ill will. But we don't stop there. We also need to add the other stuff, the deeper stuff, along with that right at that same time, so that after we get the skills of what to do and how to do it, we have the mind straightened out. We have, without a doubt, knowledge and vision of what is to be done and what is not to be done. Now we kind of lump conceit, restlessness, fear of death, and those really, really deep issues right back in with the feelings. Even though the feelings are on top of this stuff, we can deal with it all together. If we deal with it such that we get feelings completely finished without this, that will leave a major deep conceit. I am the best monk in this temple, will be kind of the way that it would be said. All right. And arahants are not conceited. Conceited people who are the best monks in the temple are not the arahants. That hard diamond of being the best monk, following all the rules better than everybody else. That's a trap, because it leads to a deep conceit. And you can see how that in fact, we can see it everywhere in politics under the guise of power corrupts and ultimate power ultimately corrupts. Okay, so if you have actually the power of the Dhamma, you have the power of Sila, the power of morality, you automatically get conceited. I'm better than they are. My behavior is better than theirs. All right. You can see that in Christianity. You can see it in politics. We can see it in many, many, many places. So it's better while we're dealing with feelings to also deal with conceit, also deal with this restlessness, make it kind of a package deal, because we can deal with it all, not instantaneously at the same time, but one by one as they occur. Being on guard, being mindful, to watch feelings, to watch conceit, to watch restlessness, so that when it comes up, and you've already been given a huge number of tools or techniques or instances of where to look for this restlessness. Next time we'll talk about conceit and where to find it, but I think you already know. But just as a tiny introduction to that, being told that we're wrong when we know we're right is a very difficult way of dealing because that will bring up conceit. I'm right. You've told me I'm wrong. Now, that's different than they've told me I'm wrong and I agree with them. I know I'm wrong because that one's easy. That means now I've got work to do if I'm a Dhamma dude. For most people, if you tell them that they're wrong, they're going to fight against it without even looking about whether it's true or not. They're just going to reject it. They say, no, I'm not. But the Dhamma dude is going to look and he's going to say, maybe they're right. I'm going to look at that. If they're in fact correct, then you can say, thank you very much. Oh, I appreciate you telling me that I'm conceited. Oh, because I am, I can see it. But if they say, you're bad at that, and I recognize, wait a minute, I'm pretty good at that. Now I've got to defend myself. That's when the conceit comes out. Oh, no, you're wrong. Oh, no, you've got to accept me the way I am because I'm good the way I am. You cannot reject me because, and there comes that conceit. So that's one of the ways conceit can come up is when you're wrongly, vainly, falsely accused. And we want to get retaliation. We want revenge. We want retribution. We want to set things right. Where, in fact, just because they said something doesn't make it that we have to fix it. We can allow them their attitude. We don't have to change their attitude. Another one, which is even more difficult like that, is that if he doesn't want to be my friend, I've got to accept that he doesn't want to be my friend. I shouldn't pursue him to try to convince him, oh, turn around and love me like I love you. If he doesn't love me, then I've got to deal with that. Let me deal with it happily rather than remorsefully. So these are issues of conceit that we can begin to work with. We'll talk about this more next time. Right now, you've got to learn to eat.
Eat and everything else during the day. Yes.
All right. Is there anything else we can do today?
No, did you enjoy that quote about Bhikkhu Buddhadasa I sent you?
Oh, yes, but that's well known. I mean, I enjoyed it. Sure,
But
that's why I said,
yeah,
go ahead.
not in the West. Like, people don't know this. The author is Thai, so she mentioned that. That's the only mention of him.
Well, that shows, I mean, even though that they're mentioning, I mean, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa has been dead now for 30 years, and still he's making headlines.
Right.
But in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, he was really, really the big dude in Thailand.
Yeah.
Possibly the best example of that is that in the Sixth World Conference that happened in 1954, it might have been 56, in Rangoon, where all of the Buddhist countries sent delegations, and they did a whole lot of stuff. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa represented Thailand, and he gave both the opening and the closing remarks for the entire event. That was the world stage that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was on in the 1950s. He represented Thailand in Buddhism.
Yeah. You had quite a teacher.
I am just overjoyed that I was so lucky that I had a teacher of, let's say, not because of the renowned, not because he was so well known, but the reasons that he was well known is that he actually did kind of revolutionize Buddhism in Thailand. He opened the gates. He showed that there is more to Buddhism than the Buddhist religion that is practiced. By doing so, he exposed something that was quite marvelous that had been kept inside the Sangha, but also the method of teaching. In the old days, because of the danger, and you probably have heard that about somewhere between 80 and 100 million Buddhists were wiped out intentionally by the Brahmins in league with the Muslims in India. Okay, so that kind of put the position that the real teachings of the Buddha are dangerous. I think I mentioned to you about Angkor, that when the Buddhists invaded, the entire civilization of Angkor fell apart because nobody cared anymore. So, but the kings if they can see that Buddhism is a threat to their power, then they'll want to wipe it out. This is the problem, is that the real teaching of the Buddha will just turn people not against government. It'll just have them start to ignore government. We don't care about government. Government's not my job. And so it's got this kind of danger to it. And so that's why it became kind of hidden inside of the Sangha. So the way that it operates is when a young monk ordains, he is taught all of the stuff of the Buddhist religion, hoping that he's going to start asking the right questions. And when he asks the right questions, then the door will be open to him to the deeper teachings of the Buddha that will lead actually to liberation. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa made that slight change to it in the sense of we do not have to wait for the students to ask the right questions. We can begin to teach it directly, openly. And that's why what I'm doing on the internet with Skype is because I have the full blessings, not just blessings of Achan Po, but literally his boot up my butt to go do it, to let this stuff out, that it's time, that with the internet and with modern times, it's not so dangerous anymore, and it's okay for the real deep teachings of the Buddha to come out for the liberation of many hundreds, many thousands, many millions of people are capable of becoming arahants. All they have to do is pay attention. They have to develop sati. That skill of sati is going to be the main bicycle that you're going to ride into heaven on. And so it's done. I mean, there are arahants, there are wise people. They do exist. They exist in Thailand, and I imagine they're in many other countries. In fact, I would go so far as to say that when I was a monk in the United States, due to the ways of the monks as well as other circumstances, I wound up being in a lot of different temples, meeting and associating and having time to talk with a lot of different monks. And I have met even nobles in Sri Lankan tradition. Burmese, I have met nobles in the Burmese tradition. I've met a lot of nobles in the Laotian tradition. I've met monks that were Thai, in the Thai tradition. They are noble. They really know the teachings of the Buddha. Well, you see, that burst my little ignorance bubble. Because my understanding was, oh, Thai is the Itzkadits. And on top of Thai, it's Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. And so the way that I would start on asking questions or getting involved with this, I would ask the monks, do you know Bhikkhu Buddhadasa? Because if they know Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, now we've got an in. If I ask him, he knows I know Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, and if he knows Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and says yes, we've automatically got this connection that we can pursue. But many of the nobles that I met didn't know Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, and that was a real head-scratcher. What that meant is that the real deep teachings of the Buddha was not just in Thailand, that it is in every culture, but that it is small, it is tight, it is unusual, it's not known. And the clear example of that is that of the somewhere between 200 to 400,000 monks in Thailand, only about 25,000 are arahants. That's a really not a good, that's not a high advance. That's nowhere near 5%. That's not a good, to where in the time of the Buddha, the estimation was that about 10% of the monks, by the time of the Buddha died, about 10% of them had become arahants. We're looking at an entire population by the time the Buddha died of maybe 20,000 monks, of which about 2,000 were arahants. It was really, really well established by the death of the Buddha. And then it really got kicked off about 100 and maybe 150 years later by Emperor Asok, who was the great great grandson of King Bimbisara, who knew the Buddha. Royal families and all of that kind of stuff. All of that lineage is there. So that's the really amazing part is that even in the time of the Buddha, 10%, even in Thailand now, down to something like 5%, that shows that the system is still working. It still operates. It's still manageable. It's still capable. You too can gain the benefits, all of the benefits of the teachings of the Buddha. It's available. So in the United States, I would go so far as to say maybe 100 to 150 nobles, and of those, maybe about 20 or so are arahants, that they do exist in the United States. And this, I'm only looking at the Theravada tradition because that is all I know. If we go for Chinese and, well, actually, I've been part of the Vietnamese tradition too, because Vietnamese is very strange with their. I actually heard this year that the Vietnamese government many years ago passed a law that actually required this to happen. And that is that in the old days, and still in most countries, there's a division between Mahayana and Theravada. The government actually passed a law to break that down, and it's really true. And the funny one is that when I was in Charlotte, North Carolina, visiting and spending time at the Vietnamese temple there were two monks. One was dressed in the robes of the Mahayana. The other monk was dressed in the robes of the Theravada. But upon inspection, the joke is that the one who dresses Theravada was ordained Mahayana. And the Mahayana monk who was ordained Mahayana is dressed as a Theravada monk, and and this is kind of the community's joke, but that shows the interconnection now of the Theravada and the Mahayana in the Vietnamese system, and it seems to have been a really excellent thing for the government to have done. It's reunified it in a way that has brought the wisdom of both groups back together. And naturally, there's going to be arahants in Japan, in China, in Tibet. Oh, in Tibet, a lot of them. So I don't know how many arahants there are in the United States or on the planet Earth, but I do know that they exist. I've met them. I've studied them. I've checked off items on the list that prove that it's true.
Do you think there could be people that are not really familiar with Buddhism, or they don't even know what arahant is, but they are like
Yes, let me give you a list of them.
Jesus?
The first thing to say is that the Buddha never claimed any uniqueness. That the path that they talk about, the Eightfold Noble Path and the Four Noble Truths, was an old path that the Buddha discovered. It was an old path. It had been there before. There had been arahants before the Buddha. Now we look at individuals and we start this checklist of stuff, and we look at people like Socrates. We look at people like Jesus, and you see that they've got these qualities. In modern times, we have the famous one of Eckhart Tolle. Eckhart Tolle has written a book, and it's very interesting that the situation is that he was suffering, he was sick, and he knew it. And he knew that he had to straighten his mind out. And that's all he knew. And now he's writing a book and talking about be here now or this present moment. And yet he had to study Buddhism in order to be able to describe what he had done. If you look at actually the teachings of Jesus, you'll see they're very similar to the teachings of the Buddha. But what Jesus didn't have is he didn't have 45 years to teach the method, to have 2,000 followers who really understood it. He wound up with 12 disciples who really didn't have a clue. So throughout history, we have had individuals who can figure it out for themselves to come out of their own suffering. That the Buddha was not unique. And that within the tradition, there is a sutta after the time of the Buddha's death, when after Ananda too also had become an arahant, and there's a conversation that he has with a Brahmin, where the Brahmin asks him, what's the difference between the Buddha and all of the arahants? This, by the way, is the sutta where Ananda brings the entire teaching of the Buddha down to just one word. The word is path. Even the Buddha couldn't do it in one word. He had to have three, dukkha, dukkha, nirodha. I like the four. Don't worry, be happy. But in this question, the Brahmin asked Ananda, Ananda's answer was, there is no difference between the arahant and the original Buddha himself, other than the Buddha discovered the path. And that we did not discover the path, we took it as a gift and practiced that path. That's the only difference, was that he discovered it. But he's not unique, because other people have at least discovered it for themselves. Eckhart Tolle, Ram Dass, some of the monks that I know, Achan Bunmi, Achan Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, the shining example, Achan Po. None of us were able to manufacture it for ourselves, or if we do, we still need the framework of the Buddha. That's what makes the Buddha unique, is that his framework of the Four Noble Truths is such an exquisite way of talking about how to come out of suffering, because that's really what it's all about. Okay? A lot of enlightened ones around. It's a good group to join. Big crowd. A lot of Dhamma dudes.
It's good to know. Well, thank you.
All right. Well, bon appetit.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, see you soon. I want to hear a good report.
Thank you so much, and also thank you for all the other videos with your other students. So helpful.
Yes, I'm very, very grateful for Achan Po to give permission to let's put it out there.
Yeah, it's great.
A lot of people have written a lot of books, but there's a problem with the books. And the problem with the books is people will read something and then they think it's a good idea, but they don't put it into practice. That's the problem with books. Page number 78, when you read that, it doesn't say, hey, dude, get off of page 78 and go back to page 32. That's what you need to know now. That's what you're forgetting. But the book is not written like that, unfortunately. So these videos, I think, will be helpful, because the students who are watching them can see what other students are going through and say, oh, yeah, that's me too. Right. And so now they can see that there's real value in having these one-to-one instructions. Without my one-to-ones with Achan Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and my one-to-ones with Achan Po, I would have never understood the Dhamma.
Well,
so don't thank me for it. Thank Achan Po. He's the one. Thank Bhikkhu Buddha. Thank the Buddha. I'm just in a line of old monks.
I don't even know where to begin to thank you. So thank you so much.
We'll talk about that later. It's called paying it forward. There will be generations. When you're 75, there will be students like you for you to teach.
The only way, I think, the minimum way to teach is just be happy and
I think so. Yes.
Yeah.
If I taught this happy Dhamma with a grumpy face, I don't think anybody would want to watch the video. Oh, no. You got to be the joy that you're teaching. Yeah. So anyway, excellent, Natalie.
Thank you so much.
We will see you later.
Till next time.
We'll talk about conceit and paying it forward later.
Yes, I can't wait.
Okay.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.